Hi everyone, this is Ping. Welcome back. Today I talked with Ianne, who is my elementary school classmate, and she migrated from Taiwan to California, and she became a multilingual person, speaking Mandarin and English, Japanese, Korean. She's such a talented girl, and I just enjoyed my talk with her so much. We talked about how she transferred her linguistic skills into her career in the gaming industry. And I found it very interesting because around me, most people who have majors in languages, usually we end up in teaching the language or translation, interpretation, or doing more linguistic studies or research. But her career has been one of the coolest I've heard. Using her language skills. So I think it's really helpful for those people who are striving to learn a new language. We talked about some skills and some practice strategies or finding motivation to learn a language. She also did a Mandarin episode on my Mandarin side. The link is in the episode note, so you can find it on 香料茶时间, which is the channel name. Let's get started. Welcome to Chai with Ping. This is Ping Robert. In this podcast, I cover immigrant stories, cross-cultural experiences, and minority issues. Join me with a cup of chai and take a listen. All right, 那我们要开始咯。
好。
Welcome back to Chai with Ping. My name is Ping Robert. Welcome back to the show. And if you want to interact with me or connect with some guests, please find us on Facebook or Instagram at Chai with Ping. And also, I would love to hear from your feedback. So if you like our show, please do give 5 stars on Apple Podcast, and I would like to see what comments you have for us. Today, we welcome my old friend from Taiwan, but she's been living in LA. Is it LA though? California for a long time. And then we're going to talk about language learning and how she connects her language learning to her career. Let's welcome Ianne.
Yay. Hi, everyone.
Hey, where exactly are you in California?
I am in NorCal. So basically right next to San Francisco.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I probably need to learn a little bit more about California because I always thought so LA is the center of California?
No, LA is actually, we call it south of California. So it's like all the way on the bottom. And then and then middle is kind of like the central area. So Santa Barbara's over there. And then the top, it would be like San Francisco.
And Silicon Valley.
Yeah, Silicon Valley is kind of like right there.
Got it. Okay, Cool. So Ianne is a Taiwanese, but she moved to California when she was 13 after graduating 12-ish after graduating from the elementary school. And then we used to be elementary school classmates, actually.
Yes.
Yeah. Would you like to share about a little background of, since we're focusing on language learning, what kind of language have you learned?
Yeah. So basically what I did was I was born and raised in Taiwan and I studied, we only know Mandarin growing up. And then my grandma also speaks Taiwanese. So I learned a little bit of Taiwanese from her. And then later on, when I was 12, I moved over to California where I picked up English. I didn't really know any English words at all when I first moved here. It was super interesting how I learned that. And then afterwards, in high school, we get to do language electives. So I went and selected Japanese because I really like Japanese shows. Not really into animes, but I like dramas or the variety shows. So I wanted to watch more of those shows. So I studied a little bit more of Japanese for about 4 years and then went into college where I continued to study Japanese and also polished up on my Chinese skills. And I graduated with a degree in linguistics.
That is quite amazing. Let's talk a little bit about your ESL learning because you knew almost nothing when you came.
Yeah.
And so how did you, I don't know, your accent is awesome. It's quite American.
It's very Californian, I can tell you that.
Yes. How did you learn English in such a short period of time? I know, like you're surrounded by Americans and everything.
It was not actually. So it wasn't really a fast learning process. So when I moved over here, I literally only knew the 26 alphabets, and I know hi and bye and thank you. Like, that's as far as it goes, right?
Yeah.
So when we went into class, like the first day, right, I went in and then they were saying like, okay, we're going to do a test because they need to understand where you're at, right? So they can place you in the right place. So I didn't even know that was a test. So everyone was just like writing things on the paper. So I was just like looking like over the shoulder of other people, trying to see like what they're doing. People thought I was cheating. And I was like, I didn't even know we're testing.
I know. Even we're cheating, but I still don't know what to copy.
I'm like, I didn't know it was a test. I didn't understand a word that any other people says. So but then in my class, there are people who from like who know how to speak Chinese. So then they were talking to me about like, yeah, no, that was what happened and things like that. And then obviously they placed me into ESL, ELD actually. And then they placed me in the level called below level 1.
Oh no! And then you just knew too little to recognize that was below, right?
It was a very small class. Let's just put it that way.
Okay. And how did you feel when you got that news? It's like, okay.
No, I didn't know. I didn't know what to expect. I was like, oh, okay, great. Now I know where to go. And then basically like in those ELD classes, they really hone in on all the skills that you need to know, right? So then they would teach you a lot about vocabularies, and they give you extensive homework on like writing, right? Because by that time I'm already supposedly be in like middle school, 7th grade, right? So there are already paper or like, some kind of writing assignments that you have to complete. And like, we don't even know a word of English. How are we going to write that? Right. So the way how they trained you is by abundance of practice. Like the practice makes it perfect. So that's how they train us, and we continue to write, and then they force us to talk to people in the classroom in English, right? And luckily in that class there wasn't anybody who can speak Mandarin. So literally, like, because no one speaks anyone's language in that class, like we were forced to speak in English, right? So that's how we kind of grew out of it. But like that was a long period, and then back then internet wasn't really there. We were like using dial-ups, and the only thing that we have like with Chinese is like radio that's in Chinese. There isn't any like cable TV that was in Chinese. Yeah. So there wasn't anything that you can be exposed of Chinese. So like you're forced to be immersed in that area, in that area in all English, right? Yeah. But to be honest, the school that I was in wasn't really all like English. Like there were a lot of Asians in that school. So, there was all kinds of different Asians, to be honest, right? And I also remembered that my teacher, who was supposed to like she's like full American, but like she was saying like Hajima, and then like that was Korean. So I didn't even know that was Korean. I thought it was English. Yeah. So I learned that. And then later on they were telling me, no, that's Korean. I was not even English.
Why does she need to say Hajima?
Because there's a lot of Korean in the school.
And Hajima means what?
Stop.
Oh, why does she want to? I don't get it. So she's like speaking to those students?
Yes, talking to the students. So like, you know how middle school kids are, like they goof around. Yeah. So that's why like she would have to say something like that. Ooh, right. Okay. But no. And then during that process, like, I watched a lot of Disney show because that's the only TV that's available to us, right? A lot of Disney series, movies, and things like that, and slowly you just kind of grew out of it and picked up English. Yeah, but it was a long period. I think I only graduated ELD after 2 years of program.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Huh. Wow. How long is that supposed to be?
I think it was around that time. Like usually they would always give you like a kind of like a graduation test or something, like, to make sure that you're proficient in the language before they move you out of the program. So for me, it was like end of the middle school. And then by high school, I didn't have to go into ELD.
Oh, because I know that there's still like so they call it ELL programs, like language learning
Yeah, it's all the same
program.
thing.
Yeah, and then they can actually take ESL as a SAT subject, but you didn't have to do that.
No.
Wow. Okay. Cool. Wow. Do you think like being an ESL learner kind of impacts how you learn languages?
In a way, but I think it comes down to like how were you surfaced to these, like how these languages surface to you, right? So like for English, it was for academic, like I need to learn this in order to get graduate. So, those are just like, that was the motivation. Like you have to learn this in order to get your A's in a class, right? And I know for like, I think during that process of like writing practice during ESL, it was like it's a very good way, right? That taught me that anything you want to be good at, you got to practice, right? But this is something that you could pick up easily from any other learnings too. Anything, if you practice more, you'll get it. So
Absolutely.
that's one thing. But like for all the other languages that I learned, for Japanese or Korean, it's really about the motivation. Like, what exactly do you want to get from that language, right? So then, what are you going to do with this language, right? And that will impact you how you learn.
That's right. Let's take Japanese for an example, because you learn how many years? 7 at least?
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the connection for you? Or even longer, even till
longer,
now, right? Yeah.
But no. So for Japanese, it was basically I studied Japanese when I was in high school and also throughout. Basically, I learned the language in a classroom. That's what I'm trying to say. So when you're learning a language inside of a classroom, you're only learning the stuff that your teacher is teaching you. So like it could be, sometimes it's very casual, right? Because like, for example, in high school, they're not supposed to teach you anything that's serious, right? They will teach you the basics. They will tell you they're supposed to make it fun for you. So you have that interest in keeping or learning this language. So, they will show us like all these, obviously all the vocabs that you're supposed to learn, the basic vocabs and then like basic sentence structures. So also you can also take the ACT class, ACT test with Japanese and things like that. They want to make sure that you have that skill to get there, right? Yes. So there's nothing that hardcore. But once you go into college, they will start to teach you a little bit more about how do you apply it when you in a real life situation. For example, they will talk to you about like, okay, what happens if you graduate and you need to apply a job in Japan? What do you say? Right? How do you introduce yourself? How do you answer other people's questions? Those kind of things. And so it's more of like real life application at that point. And then also it depends, like when I started my grad school, my Japanese class became like more about like academia, right? So they teach you how to read classical Japanese, which is, you're not going to be able to use it anywhere else.
Yeah,
other than, from books, like when you're doing research and stuff. So it's very different, like how, like in what stage are you in that language program? You will be learning different things, basically.
Wow. Okay. And then you went on for grad school for teaching Chinese as a second language. Is that
basically. It's called like Chinese pedagogy. So it's part of like the applied linguistics. So it's more like how do you, basically it's just like, how do you teach Chinese as a second language to a foreigner, right? Yeah. So that's the official title, I guess, for that.
Yeah. Why did you go for that? Why didn't you go for ESL or Japanese teaching or, other programs?
Well, for that, it's also because like, Japanese is definitely, it's like my fourth language. It's not my best language for sure. Right. And then Chinese is more of my comfort zone. Like I know that language well. So I'm totally fine with like, and I love the language. I think it's super fun. And it's kind of like a opportunity to kind of just land on my lap, really. So, I was studying Asian studies and doing linguistic work with some of the professors in the department. And they also said that, this is something that would be very interesting if you wanted to try out. So that's why I tried it.
And then you found out.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was a great experience. I get to teach some of the college students Chinese, and I realized, this is a very challenging job, and actually, it has to come naturally. Not everyone can become a teacher, right? You got to have, you can't just have the language skill and become a teacher. There's so many other qualities that comes with that. Right. So it's not as simple as like, oh, that language, you have a degree in it, you can teach. So after graduating the grad school, and I realized, okay, this is not something that I wanted to do. It's just not my thing. Right. Like I really like the social linguistics part of how the language works. But and it's also very interesting about like, all the teaching methodologies that comes along. But, it's great to study the theory, but I really don't like to actually apply it to other people. Yeah. So it's just not my thing. So that's how I found out, like, it's okay. I spent 2 years to realize that this is not something for me, which is still great.
Yeah. Wait, so you also mentioned, so if listeners, you're a Mandarin speaker or listener, you can go over to 香料茶时间 to listen to the Mandarin episode that we did. You mentioned that a lot of your classmates were in the program that they went on for a higher, maybe doctoral studies or another degree. So then, since you love doing research, why didn't you continue in academia? But you came out and then, try to find a job in the market.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I was really burned out at the end of the program, right? Because you would, at the end, that this is not something that you want to do. And you're just kind of burned out from that environment. And honestly, if you want to do research, you can do research anytime you want, right? Even outside academia. So, I didn't really feel that it's necessary for me to continue going. And I really want to explore what's out there. And also my husband graduated, so I wanted to be with him. I didn't want to stay in school afterwards. So yeah, those all the different reasons behind that decision.
Did you teach your husband something?
Oh yeah, he was. Yeah, so like part of my linguistic program, like when I was in undergrad, there was a class that I took was for ESL, basically like teaching English as a second language. So a TESOL, sorry. So part of that class is to tutor other people for the language to make sure that they're proficient. And there are different things that you could tutor them on. It could be writing, it could be speaking abilities, whatever, pronunciations, anything. And so, yeah, that was something. He was in the class that I visited. So
a little romance in there. Oh, wow. So he is a pure Taiwanese. So he just went to college.
No,
grad school.
Yeah, he finished his college and grad school. Well, actually, master's in Taiwan, and then finished all the military stuff, and then came over for doctoral studies.
While you were doing your undergrad? Yes.
Ooh,
okay.
That's because for people who are in grad school, if they want to become a TA, they need to pass a certain class. Like they need to show that their English proficiency. Yeah. So they have to do a test, basically. Yeah. So I was the person to help him to make sure he aced that test.
Got it. That's interesting. And listeners probably can hear the kids behind the background. Ianne is a mom of 2. How can you manage that?
I can't. I have my husband.
Oh, awesome. Wow. So I know that you have been working for more than 7 years in the industry, and then your industry is so cool. But then also later you learn Korean. Could you talk about that experience?
Yeah, sure. So like basically, I was stumbled upon like this opportunity to work in the gaming industry. So I work in games for localization. So basically translation, but next level, kind of like taking it to the next level, beyond beyond translation. And so in some of the companies that I worked at would basically take Asian games and have them localized and published in the Western markets. So that's usually what we do, and one of which was Korean games. So then we had the opportunity. They actually, one of my companies was really nice, and they hired an instructor to come to the company and come to the office and teach us Korean from the ground up. So that's how I started learning Korean, and then later on, like we applied it a little bit more. When I started working on Korean games, I get to work with a lot of Korean, and yeah, that's how I put it. But basically for Korean, I'm still at like elementary level. Like it's not even close to be proficient or fluent in any shape or form.
Yeah, wow. But I'm still just kind of impressed that you learn so many languages. I know I learned so many languages, but I'm not proficient in outside of like the Mandarin and English zone. But you also learn a language on the job.
Yeah,
That's just fascinating.
it was a lot of work actually.
Yeah.
Like, and I still remember there was like a picture that I posted on Facebook was when I first studied Korean, and it was me writing all of the alphabets in Korean, like on pages and pages and pages of notes, because the only way I know how to learn a language is to just repeat and rinse and repeat. Rote learning.
Okay. So is that one of the tips that you give the language learner?
Practice make things perfect.
Are there any other tips that you would like to provide from your experience, like how you can learn a language better?
Honestly, I think like the most important thing when it comes to language learning, it has to be motivation. If you can't find motivation behind this, then and I think it goes beyond language learning too. It actually applies to everything. If you don't have any motivation behind it, there's no way for you to like actually pick it up, right? There has to be something behind it. And most of the time you have to like really come from your heart. The goal cannot be like, oh, because I have to ace this test. Like that is not a motivation, right? The motivation I'm talking about, like, and what I have seen is like, for example, if you were to make a girlfriend, right, in Taiwan, all of a sudden your Chinese is gonna be so good, and you'll be able to read and type in Chinese in no time, right? So that's the motivation, because you got to communicate to somebody you like. So that's how you will be learning that language really, really fast. Another motivation would be something like, oh, I really like K-pop, right? And I want to understand all those interviews and all the variety shows that my favorite artist is in. Then you have that motivation to really learn that language, right? Before then, if you didn't find your motivation, you're just basically learning stuff from a textbook, and it's not fun. There is nothing out of it, right? You have to find something outside of it that you can actually use it for. That's the biggest tip. You got to find the motivations. And then, the other tip would be like, practice makes things perfect. So you got to practice a little bit more. And then we also talked about this when we were doing the Chinese episode, but about how, people would complain about learning in Chinese, and like, I already wrote it 10 times. Why can I still not remember it? Right. But then so you gotta do more.
I know. I gotta tell all the Mandarin learners out there, like we spent at least 6 years in school writing characters every day. Every morning, I remember.
Remember all the homework books that we have, and like every single new word that we learn, we have to write at least 20 times a day, right? Like you got to do it, and then you do it for years.
And constant testing. I mean, like there will be quizzes in the morning or quizzes in the class.
Yeah, and people are complaining about pop quizzes here.
Well, if you choose Chinese, that's just something that we need to practice on. Well, yeah, definitely. Oh, so do you create an environment? For example, like Japanese is a big thing for you. But like,
Yeah.
do you have lots of people to talk in Japanese with, or?
Yeah. So I think it also has to do with like my professor. They're really good with teaching that language, right? They really create that immersive environment. So once you go into that classroom, you can only speak in Japanese. Even you're on like level 1 or level 2, right? Like you're beginner learners. They want you to only speak that language, and there's no English at all in that classroom. Whether or not you understand is a different story. I mean, your textbook is going to have English on it, but the instructions all in Japanese, and you can only talk to your classmates in Japanese, right? And then we also do like outside of classroom activities, right? We go out and we go eat and we go go drink, and then everything in Japanese. And then we also have like, we start blogs. I mean, back when blogs is not a thing, so it's still blogs.
There are still blogs. Probably just websites now.
Right. Yeah. Back then YouTube wasn't that big yet.
Yeah.
So, we're doing like our own Japanese blogs, and we write stuff on there. So in that way, it's kind of like how you would learn when you were teaching your kid to learn in English too. Like, when you have input, you also need a good output, and that's how your language can get better. So like all of the things are like kind of in that program and really force us to do it. But at the end of the day, right, the classroom is only maximum of like 1 to 2 hours a day. So you're not constantly in that environment. It's more about like, outside of classrooms, what do you find interesting, and how do you immerse yourself in it, right? So like for me, it was like I said, I learned Japanese because I really want to watch the shows. So that's, and I literally watch it during my leisure hours. So it's, you basically immerse yourself in that environment. You listen more, you get all those passive learning in. So I think that's also very, very helpful.
Yeah, I think I gave the similar tips to because I'm tutoring on campus like for Mandarin and in English. A lot of English students will come to me and say, how do you practice it? Why are you only here for 3 years, but you can speak so fluently? I'm like, I think I did the same thing, but it's just like, I love Hollywood movies and like Friends, or, those like small sitcoms.
Yeah.
And they're fun. So
yes.
It's like I'm learning something, but I'm also having fun.
Yeah, exactly. You got to find that fun part, right?
Yeah.
Like for me, when I was in high school, so how like in Taiwan, we have MSN.
Oh yeah. The messaging,
right?
the old app.
Right. And then like, I mean, nowadays it's like whatever text message stuff we have. WhatsApp and like Line and stuff. But back then it was like MSN. And then, but in the States, it was actually AIM. So it was a different message. Yeah, it was a different messenger app, basically. It's the same thing, but like really, really plain.
Okay.
But that's what everyone was using. So if you wanted to talk to your friends, you would need to be on AM. And then if you want to talk to your friend, you need to type fast because no one's going to wait for you. Right? You know what I mean? Like that's how. So you want to be in the group. You want to talk to your friends, and like calling people is definitely not the right thing because like people can pick on the other phone. The cell phone wasn't even a thing back then. It was like landline. So your mom on the other side can also pick up the phone and listen to you. But
oh yeah, we've been through that.
But then on AIM, it's kind of like texting too. So then you were just like doing your messaging thing and talking to your friends. So that was a motivation for me to wanting to talk to my friends. So that was the time when my like typing skill went up.
You gotta find yourself in a battle.
Yeah, you gotta talk fast.
Yeah.
Or else people are just like, oh my God, you take so long to type.
Oh yeah. Or by the time that you're finished one sentence, it's already in another topic. Right.
Right. So, that's another motivation to do that, to chat with people. So, having the messenger is also something very useful for a language learning too.
Yes.
So communication.
Yeah. I think I spent so much time typing to people instead of speaking when I was in Taiwan, because I don't have anyone to speak English with. But I will
Mhm.
always like intentionally, if you know ICQ, what ICQ is,
Yeah.
it's like to
Yeah.
match you with friends at that time. So ICQ is almost like a messenger WhatsApp before, but like it's out there, and then it can be a chat room
Right.
that we can chat with
Mhm.
strangers. So then I will intentionally find people from the US and then just, just type questions to them and then ask them like where they are, what they're doing, and all that. I think it really helped me to read it because by that time I don't have the spoken ability yet. But at least I
Yeah.
can read it and I can find a way out from my keyboard to type it back.
Definitely.
Creates a kind of a boundary for me to practice in a safe zone, but then I
Yeah,
don't have
because
to
you can type at your own pace.
Yeah.
Right. But whereas like a verbal conversation is like people are just like staring at you while you reply.
Very
So you have
stressful.
that this awkward silence kind of thing.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
But then when you're typing, people might not be looking at it right away.
Yeah.
So you're just waiting for people it's fine to take that time to type.
So last question. How do languages play a role or multiple roles in your career? Because you just talked about you're in the gaming industry, and then that's just something that we don't really hear about.
Yeah. So I think for me, also localization was something new. Like when I graduated, I have no idea that this was a thing, like that there is a industry called localization that is really heavily relied on languages and linguistics. So when I graduated, I really didn't think that there's anything that I can do. But I'm very glad that I found it. So basically for localization, you don't necessarily have to know all the languages, right? We work on a lot of languages. So we would work on, depend on where you work at. But for me, most of the time I work from, 4 languages to 20 languages. So there's a lot of languages that we have to handle and manage, but we don't have to speak all of them. So we would outsource it to people who actually speak that language. They're the linguist for each of the language. But then what you would need to do is to at least understand the basics. You need to know the differences between the languages and what are the potential challenges that you would see when it comes to translation from going from one language to the other. Some languages can be longer. Some languages will be shorter when you're localized. For example, Mandarin, like Chinese, Japanese tend to be shorter because we have the use of like the Chinese characters. So you can express yourself in like 2 characters, where in English, it might be taking up like, 3 to 4 words. So if your game only allocated that small space for that word, you're not going to be able to fit all the English
speech bubbles, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So those are the things that we take into consideration when it comes to localization. And some of the languages are just more, that has a little bit specialness to it, I guess. Like for example, like German, the way how that language works is just, it has a long word system.
Super long. Yes.
Because they like to conjugate words.
Yes.
Right. So that's the reason why, like, that's one thing that we need to take into consideration. For example, for like French, there's like spaces before the punctuation sometimes, right? So all these things, and like, how each of the language handles their numbers. You know how in English we have the commas, but in the European languages they don't. Some of them use a period, some of them use a space. So those all the things that we could take into consideration. It's all about languages, and that's super exciting for me. It's super fun. So they would also prefer to have people who actually have linguistic backgrounds, because you are sensitive to these kind of things. Right. And then if you know certain languages, that will be even better, because when it comes to localization, sometimes you would also need to provide a list of taboos. Right. So when you're translating something, or you're looking at some images, whether or not it will work for that country. Right. So, for example, there was one game that I worked on, and then there was a little character. It has green hair. Right. So, this is something that, or like, do you want to talk about your main character, or like one of your characters wearing green hat in the Chinese culture? Probably not, right?
Wait, but our listeners won't know what it means, right? So,
right.
Is there an English expression for that?
No, it just means somebody's cheating on you.
Yeah. But like in Mandarin, we say that someone is wearing a green hat because they are being cheated on.
Yes.
Okay.
So there are those nuances, or like, sometimes when you translate it directly, it could mean something else. It will have a negative connotation. So like those are all the things that you would only be sensitive if you know that language and culture. So so that's why, knowing a language and all knowing the culture behind it can really help in this world of localization, I guess.
You mentioned that like in the gaming industry, a lot of times that you guys outsource, is that the term you use? Outsource those games or linguistic needs to other people. Are you only hiring in the US, or it's like you outsource to international companies as well?
Yeah, it's definitely outsourcing to international companies, because ultimately what you want is in-country linguists, because you want to make sure that your linguist is really immersed in that environment and knows like the in and out of what's going on, the language, because all language evolves. There are new words, etc., that's coming out, and you want to make sure that this person really understands that language inside and out.
So is it easy for international students to actually get this kind of jobs when they're here in the US? But because like all of them, like all of us, we all have like a native language, but then on top of that, like English could be the second one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So like if your students has like a special skill in that language and would be interested, I would highly recommend them to look into companies that basically says localization. If they're hiring for a language specialist, apply for that job and then see if it fits them. But obviously it would depend on like where you're located. Some of the localization companies, I know that there are ones inside, like a lot of them are in California, a lot of them are in Canada, like Montreal area. I'm not so sure about Denver, but it's all worth checking out, especially nowadays that a lot of people are working remotely anyway.
That's right. Yeah.
So this is definitely something to check out.
You stayed in the industry for so long. Is there a memorable moment for you or satisfaction that you can share with us?
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I would say like every time we push out a game, when we hit that button, going live is a very, very very satisfied moment for all of us, really, because you worked so hard on that product, right? And finally getting it pushed out is always very, very satisfying. Every single game that I pushed out is my baby.
That is right. Not just those two human beings at your home, right?
Right. Figuratively speaking.
So if those people, like whether students or immigrants here in the US, they want to get into this industry, what would you suggest them to prepare? This is literally my last question. I just can't stop talking, but this is so fun.
What do we want them to prepare? I think for me, a lot of time is the knowledge of the language. You have to show that you really know the language and be able to translate well. And you have a very keen eye to things. So like I said, localization, there are a few parts to it, right? So there is the translation part, there's the editing part, and there's also the QA part. So it depends on what your skill set is. You can apply for different things. If you really like translation, can you take one language and then translate it into another language and make sure that it flows nicely in that language, right? And then, and for the QA part, you really have to have a very good eye on catching bugs. Be very, very meticulous about everything is the key.
Yeah, detail oriented.
Exactly.
The job be lonely sometimes?
The job, it can be. A lot of the times for me is like a one-man army kind of thing, because most of the gaming company won't have a lot of budget to hire a lot of people working on localization. So they would hire like one person, which is like a localization producer, and then have this person manage all the tasks that's related for localization and just outsource all the things, right? But you need to have somebody to coordinate all the tasks. But it can be lonely in that sense. But then there are also other companies that I worked at that actually does have a localization team, meaning that they do have in-house linguists and stuff. And then that wouldn't be lonely at all, because you actually have people to feedback all the translation things, right? Like you get to talk about it and you get to discuss and like, oh, what was the best way to translate this thing, right? So it's actually very fun and interesting. Like if you really love languages, I think that's it's a natural thing to
gaming too, if you like to play games.
Yeah. And the one thing about gaming companies is that like the gaming industry as a whole, I'm not sure about other industry because I haven't been, like I've only been in gaming industry. But one thing that struck me was that everyone that I met in like a gaming company, they're super, super excited to do what they do. Every day that I go into the company, they're excited. They're very happy to do that they can get to work on a game that they like, right? So I think that's also a motivation, and that kind of like working environment atmosphere is something that, you know, you probably wouldn't see like in a traditional, maybe like a Taiwanese company, right?
Yeah.
That passion. You're making something that you really like.
Yeah, wow, that's just ending it with a great note. Wow. How can or the listeners find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn.
All right. So I will put the details in the episode notes. And thank you so much for sharing your experience on language learning and how you immerse with the languages and how you put like a career goal to some of the listeners' ears. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks.
Yay! Thanks for listening to Chai with Ping. If you think someone will benefit from this episode, don't forget to share it with them. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram. If you like my show, you can buy me some chai with small donations. Details are in the episode notes. Till next time.